So there's a particular challenge preaching today, because on the one hand, of course, on this day, we remember the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and on the other hand, in a few days, we are waiting for the inauguration of our next president, which the nation greets with all kinds of feelings, and I know there's a lot of feelings right here in this room. And those two events coming together, it's hard to make sense of what on earth we could say here from this space on this day. I think the gospel today does provide us with something of an answer, and I believe the answer is simply this. The reading we got today, the gospel reading we got today, comes from the first chapter of the Gospel of John, and at the very, very beginning of it, in verse 4, there's a line where it says, "The Word came, and it was the life of the world, and this was a life that was light and shined in the darkness." And I think the message we should get today is that we're called somehow to be lights shining in the darkness. And I think today's gospel kind of lays out a little bit of a plan of how to do that. The story you heard, which kind of comes a little bit later in that same chapter, is about Jesus calling the first disciples. And all four of the Gospels have an account of this, about how the first disciples came to follow Jesus. And the details are a little bit different from one to the other, but they all agree about one thing, is that the disciples responded like that, right away. They jumped up and they followed Jesus. They didn't ask questions. They didn't hesitate. And it's an astounding thing. If you look again back on the reading we have today, it seems like there's no reason for their response, because it's a huge thing they're doing, right? They're standing up, they're following him, they're agreeing to put their lives in his hands, they're leaving behind family and friends and possessions and home and their job to follow this man wherever he goes. And he has no credentials. You know, he's not recognized as a prophet. He's not a prince or anything like that. But they decide to follow him. And it's even stranger again when you look at the reading today, because you can't figure out what it is that he's done to earn their devotion. Because look at it, he doesn't teach them. There's no teaching. He doesn't quote scripture. He doesn't preach. He doesn't do any miracles. He doesn't heal anyone or cast out any demons. He doesn't even claim that he is the Messiah. He never says it to them. I am the Messiah. I am the Son of God. I am the Lamb of God. He doesn't say any of these things. They just leap up, and somehow just by seeing him, they are converted, right? They say, yes, this is the man we want to follow. This is what we want to do with our lives. And I got to be honest with you, boy, I wish I had that power just to bring someone into discipleship with Christ somehow just by looking at them or whatever it was, because this church would be full then. It's something, you know, we need to think about. He brings these disciples in so easily, and we seem to struggle with it. Not just us, but all the churches out there seem to struggle with it so much. And what is it that he does? Why are they converted? Why are they brought in? I think we have a resource for answering that question right here in this congregation, and it's you. Because you see, if you look around, everyone in the church right now, with the exception of the adorable twins, are grown. You're all grown folk, which means that you made a choice to be here today, right? Many of us grew up in the church, but I think we all realize that in the church there's a moment where we make a choice, right? Whether we're going to stay with it, because your kids, you go because your parents bring you. At some point you make a choice about whether you want to stay or whether you want to go. And everyone who is here today made a choice to stay. You made a choice that somehow this thing of following Christ was important to you. And and this is just, I don't know if anyone's going to feel the courage to stand up, so it's a bit of a risk, but I wanted to ask if anyone wanted to kind of try and answer that question. Why did you make the choice? Why did you decide that this was important? Because it's Sunday morning, right? There are other things you could be doing. There are other good things to do with your Sunday, or a lot of things not to do, which people look forward to on Sunday, right? To sleep in, to do nothing. There are other things you could be doing, but you chose to be here. And I was curious if maybe a couple folks might be willing to stand up and say, why was it you made that choice? Why did you decide that this thing of being a disciple of following Christ, which takes time and effort, was worthwhile? Go ahead, Lloyd.
I come to church to learn God's word, to fellowship with my brothers and sisters,
Mm-hmm.
That's why I do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can choose to go anywhere else. I passed 20, 30 churches before I get to this church.
Yeah.
But I choose to come here.
And how did you come to make that decision? I mean, like, what was the thing in your life, the moment where you said, this is something that I want?
It's not the fact that my mother and father brought me here, by the ear, pulled me here, and made sure I came to church. I can't seem to do that same thing with my own children. It's because I have the love for God
Mm-hmm.
and the love for everybody here as my brother and sister.
Yeah.
And I enjoy doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
In the presence of the Lord.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Jim.
I've been in Calvary for 60 years, since I was 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody told me to come to Calvary.
Mm-hmm.
I saw some students in another school that I attended, and they were coming to Calvary. I met teachers in my elementary school who were members of Calvary. And then I decided at 15 to walk in this door, and I've never left.
Mm.
All of these years of my life, I raised my 4 children in this church and had them all baptized and confirmed. And I was confirmed in the 60s
Mm.
at Calvary Episcopal Church.
Mm-hmm.
And I never left, and I don't plan to, because I love this church. I love the people who are here. Fellowship means a lot. And I come from Prince George's County every Sunday to Calvary.
You came in the door at 15, and you decided to stay. So what happened when you came in the door that kept you here?
Well, I was a member of Metropolitan A&E Church, another church, Methodist, is 15th and M. That's where I was baptized. My parents were long-term church members. We, in the family, have always been church. And I could not get that out of my system.
Mm.
I didn't try to. And I know other things were not as important
Mm.
as being in the church and continuing to learn the Word.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what has kept me in Calvary. But fellowship plays a major part.
Mm-hmm.
And I love a lot of the members that I've known over the years. And I cannot regroup and get this nowhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
So I grew up, yes, grew up in church, and when I went to college, it wasn't so much so that I felt I needed church.
Mhm.
I lost without it when I was in college. So I went back to church, and now I continue to go to church because God has blessed me, and I feel like the 2 hours that I give Him on Sundays is the least I can do for all that He's given to me. And for me, it's a matter of me needing to come for a renewal.
Mm-hmm.
And for strength as well as to give, confess my sins and get forgiveness. So I need that each week.
Yeah.
That's for me.
Yeah.
That's why I continue.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was baptized to Calvary 75 years ago, and I guess I must say that I have been back and forth. Sometimes I'm here, sometimes I get to Calvary and I go away and then I come back. Calvary is my home church, and there's nothing else I can say about that. But I come because I'm thankful,
Mm.
and I want to thank every time I come. There are things that I have to thank for.
Yeah. Go ahead. Can we get maybe one more? Go ahead, Glenn.
I came to Calvary because a classmate of mine told me that a neighbor that my mother had when she was a child was the minister here in Washington, D.C. And that minister was James O. West. And when my classmate told me that this was the church where he was, I came. And I believe I stayed because the Lord drew me here.
Mm.
But in the late 70s, I had a conversion experience where I discovered that God is real. And therefore, I'm here now because I believe at this time, this is where He wants me to be. This is where He wants me to serve Him. And at any point that He decides this is not the place, then wherever He decides I'm to go, I'll be going.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know actually if we waited a few more minutes, we'd get more folks standing up, and eventually we could probably hear from the whole congregation. But the thing I heard from all of you was that there were a lot of different stories there, and we all think are here for different reasons. But one thing is we come here because there's something we're seeking that we find in this place. There's something we seek and we find here. And it was true for the disciples as well. I think for many of us, I know this is true for me, and a couple of you did mention fellowship. I think for many of us, it's the experience of meeting someone who is a disciple, someone who is a Christian, and noticing something about that person and the way they are in the world and thinking, boy, I want that, what they have. There's something about this person that moves me. I think that's what the disciples find when they meet Jesus. They're seeking something, and when they meet Jesus, he doesn't have to say anything. It's just the way that he is in the world, his presence, the way he interacts with them, that moves them somehow. They see in him the light of the world, the life of God, the love of God. And as we're told again in that first verse of, in the third verse of the Gospel of John, it is a light that shines in the darkness. And we all know how that light that shines in the darkness has a power to draw us. I remember after I graduated from college and before my bishop sent me abroad to do a missionary year, I took a road trip with my brother to visit our sister. She was living out in Colorado, and we took Highway 50. Highway 50 coming through California and Nevada has the reputation of being the loneliest road in America, and it's well deserved. If you're driving on that road, it's through the desert, and you'll drive half an hour without seeing another car, and you'll drive an hour between seeing one town and the next, and there's nothing in between. And we were driving, and it got dark, and we made that decision, which people make sometimes, which is usually not a good one, saying, let's push on a little bit. We had passed a town and said, let's push on a little bit further to see if we can make a little bit more miles before we stop for the night. And sure enough, we started looking down, and the fuel gauge light turned on, right? Yeah, and we're out in the middle of nowhere, and I was wondering how this would turn out. This doesn't have a bad ending at all, but I remember, and the way Highway 50 is you go through these long plains that go through the desert, and then there'll be mountains every 50, 60 miles. And we saw the glow over the top of the next set of hills that let us know that there was a town just beyond it. And there was such a sense of relief in seeing that light. So there's this kind of thing about the light in the darkness that draws people towards it because there's a sense of finding something that matters, finding a place that belongs. And the disciples seem to find that when they see Jesus. There is something about him that draws them in. He is that light in the darkness that draws them closer. It's maybe not a fact that matters all that much, but it's an interesting one to note as we think about this weekend we celebrate, when we celebrate the holiday in remembrance of Martin Luther King, to note that his church, Ebenezer Baptist, grew enormously during the period when he was doing the work of the civil rights movement, and the membership grew. And it wasn't because they were doing big evangelism campaigns or anything like that, but it's because they were out in the world being a light of the gospel. They were doing the things that Jesus commanded. They said, things aren't right with our brothers and sisters, and we think that Jesus wants us to do something about it. As a congregation, they were doing those things, and the people in the world said, these folks have something. They have a strength of a kind of courage and a deep compassion and love that drives them to do difficult things, and people wanted to be part of that. People came to the church to do difficult things. Isn't that an astounding thing to think about, right? Because a lot of time we find the easiest path. People were drawn to this church because they were doing hard things, but they were doing it in the name of Christ, and people saw something there that they wanted. I think that's what the disciples see as well. They see Jesus, and they see his love, and they see his courage, and they are just drawn to it. It's something they want, and they want to be part of. And I think that's an important message for us as a church because it's very clear that these things that Jesus does, we are to do also. That verse again from the Gospel of John says that light was the life of the world, of all people. So the life that's in us is the light, the life that's in us, the breath in our lungs, the way we move in the world is the light of Christ. And we're called to let that light shine. Jesus tells the disciples again in John's Gospel at the Last Supper, and you probably all know this verse. He says, by this, the world will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. Not because you say that you're my disciples. He doesn't say that. And not because you wear a cross around your neck, though I do. And not because you belong to one church or another. It's not anything you say or profess or something he says, but it's because you love. The love that you have will prove to the world that you are my disciples. It's not because of the miracles that he does or the words that he preaches. that the disciples are drawn to Jesus, but it's because of the way that he loves them. And in his love, they see the light and the love of God. So we get some specifics also from the gospel, because it's always good to have some specifics of like, well, what does it mean for us to try and be the love of God in the world? What does it mean for us to try and be the light of the world? And he gives us some specifics. So if you look, at first glance, the whole story seems kind of so casual. Like I said, there doesn't seem to much that draws them. You notice if you read it again, John's there with his disciples, and it says Jesus is just walking by. And John points and he's like, that guy over there, that guy who's walking there, that's the Lamb of God that I was telling you about before. Like, it seems so casual, right? And the disciples, they go and follow him. And then Jesus notices at some point that they're trailing behind him. And he turns around and he says, what do you want? And they tell him, where are you staying? And he says, well, you can come and see. And then we get this funny little detail that he stayed with them until 4 p.m. And that's kind of the end of it, right? And it seems so casual. But there's a lot that happens there that's very profound. They're walking behind him, and he says, what do you want? And when we first hear that, you get the sense of like he's bothered or something, right? Like when you're on the bus, and you notice that somebody's looking at you and won't stop looking, and you say, what do you want? Like, why are you bothering me? And it sounds like that's what he's saying. But in the Greek, he asks them a very specific question. He says, what are you seeking? What are you searching for, right? And that's a profound question, right? If you really got the time to ask somebody in your life, what are you looking for? What are you searching for? Because I think most of us have that sense that we are looking for something, right? There's something that we're trying to find, something we're trying to fill. There's whatever it may be, companionship, a job that gives us purpose, whatever it may be, we're looking for something. There's something we feel like is missing in our lives, and we're seeking after it. And he takes the time to ask them. And I think it's an honest question. What are you seeking? What are you searching for? Why are you following me? Why does this matter to you to find out who I am? He's not bothered. He's curious about them, right? And I think that curiosity is the first step in this kind of love, this godly love that he has. How often do we really take the time to be curious about the people around us, right? The people we know and the people we don't. To really ask that question. How often have you asked that question, how are you doing, when you meet someone, with the real intention of trying to find out an answer, right? We say it the same way we say hello, right? Have you ever asked somebody that question, how are you doing? And they start to really give you an answer, right? And you're like, whoa, I didn't want that whole story about everything that's going on with you, right? But you asked. Jesus asked the question, and he's curious about the answer. He wants to know more about them. So that first step in loving someone, I do think, is taking the time to find out what's going on with them and what are they about and what do they care about and what do they want. Asking the question in real curiosity, what are you doing? What do you want? What are you searching for? So they tell them, well, we want to know where you're staying. And then he says, come and see. So first he finds out about them, there's a sense of curiosity, and then there's a sense of invitation. Rather than saying, oh, I'm staying over there, he says, why don't you come and see? And maybe we can talk a little bit. So there's a sense of inviting them into his life, into his space. And we do get this funny detail at the end. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And you say, well, why would the gospel bother including that? That doesn't seem all that important, the time of day. But it is significant. Because remember, this is a desert area where they are. That afternoon time in the day is the hottest time of the day. It's hot. It's late in the day. People are tired because they've been doing whatever it is they've been doing all day, and Jesus has been too. He's moving from place to place doing something. It actually comes for him at an inconvenient time. This is not the easy time to welcome someone, to invite someone. And there is that kind of sense of sacrifice that's necessary, even kind of a little sacrifice, and one that's not that difficult, in loving the people around us, of inconveniencing ourselves, right? And taking time out when we could be doing something else, or maybe we don't want to be doing anything at all. Inconveniencing ourselves for the sake of getting to know the people around us, which, if you've ever experienced it, matters a great deal. When you understand that someone has taken time out of their day for you, can be a huge and tremendous blessing. He takes care of them. He brings them to the house where he's staying, and there's a clear sense that he has offered them hospitality, cared for their well-being, offered them something to eat. They go out then, and this is the other piece, and then they bring Simon Peter back, Simon, the brother of Andrew, to meet him, and they said, we found the Messiah. So somehow in the course of this conversation, they recognized that this man was the Messiah, the Son of God. And Simon comes back, and Jesus looks at him and says, "You are Simon, but you will be called Cephas," which you all heard there is translation of Peter, which I hope you know by now. What does Peter mean? Something you should know in the church. Rock, right? It means rock, which you heard me say before. If you actually follow the life of Peter, he is not a rock in any way, shape, or form, right? Peter is inconsistent. He's brash. He gets angry when he should keep his cool. He gets scared when he should be faithful. He gives the wrong answer anytime he's asked a question. He makes promises he can't keep. There is nothing like him, in him that is like a rock. But Jesus looks at him and says, "You will be the rock." Because Jesus isn't looking at what he is. Jesus is looking at what he can become. Jesus names him because of the best part of his nature and then helps him become that, right? And so often, in the world, we get hung up on the worst parts of each other's nature, right? That's kind of often the first thing we go to is when we talk about someone when they're not around, we tend to talk about their faults. And especially if they've got a lot of them, and Peter's got tons. But Jesus instead talks about his potential, right? The possibility of what he could be. And he says, "You are the rock, and I'm going to help you get there." And he does. And we find out this remarkable thing, that all through the course of Jesus' life, Peter still seems confused and angry and inconsistent. But after the resurrection, he becomes this rock that Jesus named him. And you discover that after his resurrection, there are none of the disciples that are more faithful and steadfast and courageous than Peter. Jesus looks at him, and instead of seeing the worst in him, he sees the best, and he helps raise it up, right? And there's a whole lot more to it, but I think that just in this little verse, we get these couple verses, we get this kind of sketch and this outline of what it means to be a light in the world, where it begins, of really taking curiosity, having curiosity in the people around us, wanting to know about them, taking the time to get to know them, being willing to inconvenience ourselves, to change our schedule and our time, to make sacrifices, to learn about and make connection with the people around us, and to care for their well-being, to say, I'm going to look after you and I'm going to do what I can to make sure that you're okay, because I understand that if you're okay, then I'm not okay either, to look for the best in other people and seek to raise that up. And I would suggest that it's complicated, but I would suggest that this is in fact part of what we see in the legacy of Martin Luther King as well. He was definitely a curious man who took time to get to know the people around him. That's how he built his organization, by taking the time to get to know other people and what they cared about and what their concerns were and what their issues were. When the Southern Christian Leadership Conference came into a town, they didn't tell them what their problems were. They spent time to figure out, what are your problems? What can we help with? What do we need to work on here? There was a curiosity, and even a curiosity for some very troubling things in our society. He spent time trying to figure out what is going on with this problem of racism in our world and in our society and in this country. In one of his most famous addresses, he says this astounding thing about how racism works for white people, because he says, you can be poor and hungry, but you can feed your child this lie of racism to make them feel like they're better than the black people around them. You can't feed them, but you can offer them that. And it's a horrible, horrible thing, but there is a sense of curiosity because he understands there's something at stake for white people here. He says you've been duped. But there was a sense of understanding of what's going on and why do you cling to this so much and how can we help you let go. There is that sense of curiosity. There was certainly a sense of inconvenience that he was willing to take on. He was willing to take on sacrifice and hardship because he believed it was important. There was a deep sense of commitment to the well-being of the people around him. He said there are injustices in our community that we must address. So there was a deep sense of commitment to that. And there was an astounding sense, really astounding sense, of looking for the best in the people around him and calling them to be that. Everyone, he looked at the people in his organization and the black people that he was organizing and said, you have it within your hands to change this situation, but you got to seize it and do it. And he looked to the white people around him and he said, you don't have to be this caricature of God's nature that you've thought for yourselves. You don't have to be trapped yourselves in this racist illusion that keeps you from really seeing what the world is going on. You can be something better than that. And he believed that it was possible that people could be better than what they were, but he also believed you had to do the hard work to help people get there. You see in his life and in the lives of a lot of people who are part of that movement, this same model of discipleship that Jesus talks about. They had made the choice to be lights in the midst of the darkness, right? And it drew people to them. I mean, that's why they were successful. People saw this light shining and they said, I want to be part of that too, even if it's hard and even if it's difficult. And that's what we need to be about as church, right? There's no clever program or clever advertising scheme that's going to bring people to hear the word of God, to receive the gospel. The way it's going to happen is that we are going to be the kind of disciples that Jesus called us to be. That we will be lights shining in the darkness, and the world will say, that is something that I want to be part of too. There's no way to convince people or trick people or sell people on this apart from being that light, the light of God shining in the world in the darkness. And I really want us all to hold to that and think about that in the weeks and months ahead about how we're going to do that. I have a couple suggestions for you right now. You're going to hear at the time of the announcements. And I'll be real brief and then we can move on. But the homeless breakfast that we have here 3 Saturdays a month is a long-standing ministry of this church that ministers to 70 to 80 people each week, feeding their bodies but also feeding their spirits, making connection. And it is a ministry that needs support, that needs volunteer support really desperately right now. And I want you to consider if the possibility of helping out with that work. And Reverend Fisher Stewart has talked about coming up in 2 months, this forum that she's hosting, a large forum, bringing police and community together, talking about how can we work together better for the safety and security of our communities. How can we help rebuild trust? What's required on both sides of the equation to make that happen? I strongly encourage you to take part in that. You'll see the dates there in your bulletin. And there are more opportunities too within this church and also outside in the community at large. But this is what we need to be about as Christians, is being a light that shines in the darkness and draws people to it. And it's not easy, but it begins with that sense of deep care and deep love and commitment for the people around us. And I hope we'll all take that on in the days and weeks and months ahead. Amen.